everyone, welcome to a new video. Thank you so much for being here today and for joining me on what will be a recommendations video. Today I'd like to recommend a few books for you to read during summer, which is definitely my least favorite season, by the way, but it does come with the advantage of being the time where I usually have more free time due to vacations and everything, so of course that means I have more time to read as well. The first book I just have to mention is Daughter of the Forest by Juliet Marillier. Juliet Marillier is one of my favorite authors. She writes fantasy books that are inspired by nature, by Celtic mythology, by Ireland. They are often set in Ireland, even if it is a fictional part of Ireland, but they have this very magical, whimsy environment to them, and I love how she relates people's emotions with nature and how she describes the power as well as it being our greatest gifts, but also maybe the most dangerous thing that we have to face sometimes. And they often also come with a love story in between, which tends to be one of the focuses of the story, and it does shine a lot along with the plot and the magic that's happening. This book in particular is inspired by a fairy tale as well. It is inspired by the Six Swans tale, I believe, but it does have a few other names. But it follows our protagonist Sorka, who is cursed by a witch, and she has to face a lot of trials in order to save her 6 brothers who are now transformed into swans, and she has to go through a lot in order to stop this spell and free her brothers. It is filled of adventure, romance, passion, magic, tension, family relationships. There's a lot going on here and I absolutely love it so much. It is not my favorite by Juliet Marillier, but it's definitely one that I read during this season and it was such a wonderful experience, so I always tend to recommend her books for any time of the year really, because she's wonderful. Next I've got The Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society by Mary and Shaffer and Annie Barrows. This is a book set during 1946, so during the German occupation, and it is all written through letters. This felt so cozy to read, despite it having some very hard-hitting topics as well, of course, because it does mention the war going on, it mentions violence, or rather the consequences of the war, I should say. But yes, it deals with grief, with loss, how to cope with that, and it also mentions how books and stories can be the best escape for that, while also bonding with other people who share the same passion. And it is such a beautiful story. I have been meaning to watch the movie for a long time because it seems so perfect, but the book is such a cozy, warming experience. It is always so wonderful to read about people who come together for a similar cause and for a shared love of stories in this case, and it's so beautiful. I'm sure all of us bookworms could appreciate a book like this one. I know that these different formats can be a little hard to get into for some people, but I also think that the characters here are so engaging. I love how the authors were able to put so much personality into these characters despite us not spending as much time with them during their day-to-day lives. We are being told rather than see what they're up to, but it's so engaging, it's so captivating, and I highly recommend this book. Plus it's so short, you could read it in just a couple of days and really immerse yourself in the story. I also wanted to mention this book. This is called To Capture What We Cannot Keep by Beatrice Collin. This is a book that I have never heard about, and I actually found it through a blind date with the book service, which is very fun. Unfortunately, I don't think that website in particular is available anymore, which is a shame. It was so much fun, but it had some keywords on the package and it sounded very good, so I gave it a chance, and I remember really being surprised by this book. It is set in February 1887, and it follows 2 people who meet in a hot air balloon above Paris. How romantic is that? The scenery itself, it reminds me a lot of summer. It reminds me a lot of the streets of Paris during the day, how beautiful they are. I can hear the music, and plus the hot air balloon plot just reminds me so much of a summer day. One of those stories where 2 people meet randomly on the street and fall in love, and it does remind me a lot of that type of story that usually I also consume during summer. This actually tackles a lot more than that though. The romance aspect is just kind of a mask for a few things that are happening underneath that are very complicated and hard to go through actually, and these characters are struggling with a lot. I don't remember all of the plot, of course, because I've read this book a few years ago already, but I remember thinking that Jane Austen could have written a similar book if she was alive today. I don't know, it just feels like a modern Jane Austen book, which maybe is a weird comparison, but it has that same feeling to me. It doesn't use Jane Austen's humor or anything, but it does provide for a good commentary on society and how much hypocrisy there can be, while also being very charming. So I remember really enjoying this one despite not remembering all the details, but I feel like it deserves more love. It's definitely an underrated gem and I'm very glad I found it. Then we have a very well-known book on the other hand. This is My Brilliant Friend by Elena Ferrante. This, again, because of the scenery, it reminds me a lot of summer. It's set in Italy during the 1950s and it is about a friendship, a very complicated friendship actually. We have Elena and Lila, who grew up in very tough circumstances and had to rely on each other to go through them with some grace and courage. But things get a little complicated. This is really a story about how messy human relationships can be, even when it comes to friendships, how toxic some friendships can be as well. And this manages to be a very fun and fascinating but also extremely sad read as well. But it is one of those stories that I highly associate with summer because I could picture everything in front of me, and I don't know if it is because it follows two people who are growing up. It also gives me the sense of a movie I would watch during summer. This is actually the first book of the Neapolitan novels. I've only read this one, but I definitely want to hear the next books of this series, and I would be very curious to hear if you've read them as well. What did you think? Because I've heard a lot of mixed reviews, especially about the ending, which makes me feel very curious. But yes, I will eventually read the rest of this series because I don't know where this friendship will go, honestly. But it also involves a lot of traveling, finding out who you are, and I really love those themes in the book, and if you do like them as well, I feel like you might appreciate this one. The Vanishing Half by Brit Bennett. This was also a book that I read in summer and it was an amazing experience. This is more on the painful book to read, but I really appreciate it for that as well because it talks about a very harsh reality. I know this book is inspired by Passing, which is another book that I would absolutely love to read. This book taught me a lot. It raised a few questions that I had never thought about, or if I did, I didn't even comprehend how big they were, and I think it's a very honest, brutal, but also kind of caring way of showing this story and telling it to us. It does get frustrating at some points to see how these two sisters handled their respective situations. Sometimes things were not in their control, and everything that they had to deal with, everything that they had to face, is scary. And to think that this is still a reality for so many people, it's absolutely terrifying, and it obviously should not happen during our century, but it does. And I feel like it's always so important to read books about this, to read books with different voices than your own, different experiences than your own, and to make you realize that this is real life. This happens and it's awful, and the story was very captivating because of that as well. This felt like real people. It felt like I really knew these sisters, and sometimes I just wanted to get inside this book and have them talk with each other about a few things. And because of that, it was also a very vivid experience. It was very engaging. I'm really glad I read this book. I cannot wait to read Passing, which is the book that inspired it, and I'm very happy I read it during summer too, again because it talks about relationships and how complicated and messy they can be, not only because of the people involved, but also because of the circumstances that society creates for them. So highly recommend this one as well. The last book that I've read on this list that I would like to recommend is How to Do Nothing by Jenny Odell. This says Resisting the Attention Economy. This is a book about doing nothing. This is a book about regaining your focus, regaining your time control, what you do with your time, how you can enjoy it without feeling guilty of doing nothing, because sometimes that's all you need. This was not exactly a favorite for me. I was hoping for it to be a bit more personal. I was hoping to hear a bit more of the author's experience so I could maybe relate to it or get inspired by it, and it definitely inspired me, don't get me wrong. It was just a little more technical than I was expecting, I guess, but it's still a very good read, and I especially recommend you to read this during summer because, again, usually it's when you have more free time. Not always, of course, it depends on your schedule, but if you do have that extra time, if you can take a vacation and go somewhere maybe around nature and read this book, I think that would be a lovely experience. Of course, we live in a society that values being productive all the time. Everything you need to do with your time must be productive in some way. It has to provide for a good result, whatever that means. And this book asks you to slow down, go and take a walk and enjoy your day. Enjoy a few minutes with nature, or enjoy a few minutes of silence, of being bored, because boredom is so important when it comes to creativity or inspiration or feeling up to do more work after you take that break. It is extremely important in ways that we don't even imagine until we are confronted by them. So because of all those reasons, I would definitely recommend this book. Plus, it does have a beautiful cover. Look at that. I absolutely love it. And finally, I want to give a bit of an honorable mention because I still haven't finished this book, and I actually want to start it again because I did start it for our Tea Leaves book club, and unfortunately I didn't have the time to finish it. But most of the girls love this book, and it is supposed to be quite a good read for summer, and that's Still Life by Sarah Winman. This is again set in Italy. This is set in a Tuscan villa in 1944. And two people meet. Apparently they also bond over their love for books, or particularly for E.M. Forster, I think. I don't know, it's also about human connection, and as you can probably tell already, I feel like that's a beautiful theme. I always love reading about it, and whenever I have more time to read, I feel like I always tend to pick books about that, about human connection, about bonding with someone, about how people can change your life in a matter of minutes just from having a very good conversation with them or learning more about their experiences. Beware that this book, I believe, also tackles a bit of the war as well, so it probably does have a few trigger warnings for that, but it does mention art a lot because one of the characters is an art historian, so everything about this book sounds fascinating to me and I cannot wait to finish it. It sounds so good. And that's basically it, really. This was a very short video for me. Usually my videos tend to be very long, but this was just a quick guide for books that you might want to read this season. I'm also about to pack for vacation. I've picked a lot of books to bring with me, and I'm excited to talk to you about them once I read them, of course. And I would also love to know, as always, if you've read any of the books that I mentioned. And if so, please let me know all of your thoughts. I would love to hear them. But for now, I need to go, actually. I need to pack everything, so I'm gonna leave you for now. I really hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you're all doing very well. And as always, I'm sending you all the love, all the hugs, and I will see you again very soon on my next video. Bye everyone!